Okay, a lot of talk about virtualization and all that. And normally I'm an ESX guy, VMware that is. But recently I had a little project where ESX just wasn't going to quite work. The guy who was going to be managing it just didn't want to deal with the complexities of it. So the alternative was, well, let's try something a little simpler and a little more reliable. Now, most people's mind instantly goes to VMware Workstation, but this time we're going to try something called Virtualbox from Oracle. So with that, let's get started. I'm going to go ahead. First thing you got to do is, of course, you got to download it. Now, the latest version as of this recording is 4.2.16. Since we're running on Windows 7 here, I'm going to go ahead and get the Windows version. You can get it for Mac and OS X. Linux. Now, Linux, I kind of looked into that. I was going to try to run it on Ubuntu or, maybe PC Linux, but it's a layer of complexity that just I didn't feel like I needed to go to. So we're going to do this on Windows. And we did the same thing on my friend's project as well. Also, at this time, you might want to get the extension pack. I usually get it. Just add some stuff like USB 3.0 support and that kind of thing. Just makes it a little more extensible. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. Okay, and we're back. So we've downloaded the two files, and there it is, the XPack and that. And that's the extension pack, and then there's VirtualBox. And we'll go ahead and we'll just click the run and we'll install it. So here we go. And we'll say next. Generally, all these options here for the install, they're all there. Everything's open. You're going to get the USB and the networking and all that. But I like to check just in case. So go ahead and say next. I don't need anything in the launch bar. Next. Okay, the network interfaces. They're going to be virtualized anyway, but make sure you've got your network card set up correctly on whatever platform you're running this on. It can cause issues. So go ahead and say yes. And we'll start the installation. Okay, when the installation is done, this is what you're presented with, which isn't very exciting. There's nothing in here. Well, there's a reason, because we haven't made any VMs yet. Now, I'll be honest with you. I initially was going to do a Mac OS X, actually a 10.4 Tiger VM on a Windows 7 machine with VirtualBox, but here's the thing. Without a Mac OS X ISO, and I don't have that, I just have original media, I didn't have a lot of success in getting the OS X install disk to be seen by this thing. So I gave up on that. But I thought, well, what's an equally painful experience to get into a VM? What's something that's so old yet so known that could be illustrative of, more than just the standard Windows 95 or Windows NT or Ubuntu or SUSE? What could we try? So I thought, what's the most painful OS I could possibly try to install? So I settled on Windows for Workgroups 3.11. And you see it picked it up. I could have picked anything. I could have picked Linux, Solaris, BSD, OS2, and of course Mac OS X, which is, you're taunting me, Mac OS X, but I picked Windows. So we'll go ahead and do that. This is how we start to create a new virtual machine. I'll click Next. Now it's asking me what I do. It said either I don't want to make a virtual hard drive, which in essence would be like running a live file system through a VM, which if you have the little USB stick, you could actually pass it through the VM and boot off it and run and not have to make a virtual hard drive. Or I could make one, or if I had one on disk already, I could just grab that. But I'm going to make a new one for this. So I'll go ahead and create. I have my choices here. I can do Virtualbox's VDI image. I can do a VMDK, which is pretty much portable to ESX, so I think I'll use that. In fact, I believe the VMDK format was something used by VMware's vConverter. I believe it outputs in that format, and I have actually been able to import into VirtualBox an ESX image, so that's kind of neat. Microsoft Virtual Hard Disk, that's VHD. Parallels HDD, and then these QED and QCOM. I've never used these, but we're going to do VMDK. Go next. The dynamically allocated. Yeah, that means it can grow, but it won't shrink. So if I make one that's 10 megabytes, remember this is Windows 3.1, back when 100 megabytes was a big hard drive. Yeah, I'll let it grow if it needs to. And here you got this option. This is kind of like those backup programs that let you put your backup files like Paragon and TrueImage from Acronis. You can split them into files less than 2 gigs so you can fit them on a USB stick that, say if you got a fat 32 USB stick, and you can't have anything bigger than 4 gigabyte files, well, there you go. Or you can fit a couple of files on a regular DVD or whatever. But we'll just leave these here at the defaults. And we kind of went by there. I have a little hang up with my mouse here. But let's see what we got for hard drive size. We see we have the basic VM here. Now, if we try to start this, nothing's going to happen. Mostly because we haven't installed an operating system. In fact, you're going to see a lot of nothing happening because, remember, this is one of the more painful ways to get an operating system into a VM. Mostly because of the operating system. But we can look at the settings here, and this is always context. If I had 5 of these, whatever one's lit up is what the settings are going to correspond to. So let's take a look at some settings. See, we have the name. This is the stuff we filled out. And we got that and that. Okay. System, this is the boot order. How much memory? We're showing 32 meg, which is actually kind of big for Windows. Processor 1, we don't need any of this physical address extensions or anything. Acceleration, okay. This is something I found out the hard way. You keep getting crashed installs if you have virtualization enabled on the Windows 3.1 VM, so turn that off. Any other time you'd be turning it on, but in this case you're going to turn it off. Chipset. I'd like to leave it as old as possible just for compatibility, but generally if it sees your hardware, it's going to work. So you see video memory says 18 meg. It's not going to really matter because that's one of the problems is 3.1 has a little problem in VirtualBox getting anything better than 16 color and 640 by 480, but hey, better than nothing. Remote display. If we actually wanted to use remote desktop clients to get this, I could enable, so I could actually go and grab it from another computer and look at this desktop if I wanted to. Kind of neat. I'm not going to enable any acceleration because really we're not going to need it. Okay, storage. This is where a lot of the magic happens. You can see right here. This is actually the virtual hard disk we made, and if it's 1 gigabyte, that's kind of big, but that's all right. And we have the floppy controller because it picked that up. That's part of the default settings of the template for Windows 3.1. They're assuming you're going to be using some kind of floppy drive, and we're going to be messing with this quite a bit, so take note here. Probably not going to do much with the CDs, but we will actually enable access to a CD coming up. Audio. I turn that off because this operating system is so old. I usually turn it off for server OSs as well. Network. Okay, enabling network adapter. By default, it's set to NAT, which means your VM, once networking is configured within the operating system that lives on the VM, it's going to be talking through basically a firewall that lives within VirtualBox. Problem is, it makes it kind of hard to talk to other computers on the network. And I want to do that to kind of show that networking is functional. So I'm going to change that to bridged. And what that does is basically say that this VM is another host and it's going to pass it through the actual physical host out here. So we'll go ahead and do that. Technically, these are the drivers that you could use for your own or whatever this thing happens to find as far as network adapters. I'll go ahead and use these. Very important, by the way, anytime you're doing the VirtualBox, no matter what the OS is, MAC address. If you do what's called a clone, and you import a clone into, say you wanted another copy of Windows 3.1, if you don't change this MAC address, you're going to have trouble with networking, because your network is basically going to think it's got two identical cards, and even if they have different IP addresses, it could cause all kinds of problems. So that's just a little side note. Anyway, this really doesn't matter that much. I'm going to go and do para-virtualized. And serial ports, don't really need them. It's enabled by default, I'll leave it, but Windows 3.1 isn't going to know what to do with it. Shared folders. What shared folders are, it's just what they say. They are shared folders between virtual machines. So if I added a virtual one like here, and I just said okay, I'm going to go browse, and then I'm going to look on my computer or my network, wherever, and I'm going to say, okay, my temp folder. And it'll auto-mount, means it'll automatically mount every time the VM opens. What's going to happen is I can put stuff in here from the VM, and other VMs can get to it without having to do any networking or anything like that. It's kind of a handy little feature. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and say OK. All right, we've configured the VM, and now let's just check some stuff that's not in the VM, stuff that's actually VirtualBox settings. Go to File. If we wanted to make it real easy, we can do import or export. What these appliances are is they're files. Like if we open an appliance, I actually have one here. Let me see if I can get to it. Yeah. See, actually, this little file, this is open virtualization, blah, blah, blah. This is actually a direct image, just like a Cronus or Paragon or whatever. This is a flat file, bare metal image. If I choose this and I say open, I can actually import this entire thing, and it'll run and it'll work right into my VirtualBox and pretty much run and go. And all the settings will kind of conform. I might have to do little tweaks, but it's going to be functional. It's kind of a cool way to get stuff in and out. If I want to export, it's the same process. So we're not going to do that right now, but it's just something I wanted to show you. Okay, preferences, pretty much normal stuff. Nothing we really care too much about. We could add adapters here if we wanted to. The VirtualBox host only is generally fine for what we're going to do. Proxy extensions, yes. Okay, that's one thing I told you. I didn't tell you, you didn't see. You saw the extensions. This allows for, I said USB 3.0, I actually meant USB 2.0, but if there ever is a 3.0 support in VirtualBox, the extensions was one of the things that's going to help enable that functionality. Plus, you'll see stuff like it says RDP, which is basically Windows Terminal Services, Ethernet, Intel Ethernet 1000 or gigabit cards. It's just more supplemental features and drivers, that kind of thing. I load it anyway just to try to be as compatible as I can. But everything here looks good. Okay, now, last thing we want to show is Virtual Media Manager. What this shows us is what we have mounted for the virtual machines to use. We have nothing on this, but see hard drives? This is the disk we made for this new VM. And it's 1 gig, and it's freaking huge. I wonder if I could shrink that a little bit. Probably not. So that's okay. This won't be living here long. That's where it lives, though. That's where you can kind of keep track of where all your virtual disk files are for your VM. So they'll all be accessible through the Virtual Media Manager. Now, here's what happens when I start this with no OS. Watch. See, it's asking me what I want to do. I'll say, okay, that. And it's going to try to start. And After a little bit, it's going to fail. There you go. That's fine. No problem. Now, I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. I always do power off the machine. What we have to do is set this thing to boot from a virtual floppy. And here's how we do that. By the way, I had to make these from physical floppies. That's why this is going to be painful. Okay, I'm going to add a floppy image to boot from. I'm going to start, since this is an old version of Windows, an old Windows version needs DOS. All these little files I have here are disk images, usually IMGs or IMZs. Best to do IMGs because sometimes IMZs don't get seen by other programs. I'm going to go ahead and say DOS622, and I got this from allbootdisk.com because my disks don't seem to work for some reason, but I'm going to go ahead and open that, and then I'm going to get rid of this one. And now what should happen, I'll set that, is that when I start this thing, it should try to install DOS. So we've set that. So we've got our disk image here. We're going to say OK. And I'm going to start it again, and let's see what happens. Oh no! Now we go, well, why did that happen? Well, because it didn't find the device. And this can be a little quirky. It's all right. Okay, let's try again. There we go. Now we're loading this floppy image, and you see, just like if it was a real PC, we got DOS, and it knows about, you see it's drive R here, so it knows about our CD-ROM. Let's do a directory. Okay. Now, what do we have to do with the disk the first time we use it in DOS? Well, we have to do an fdisk. So let's do that. We'll say create the partition, create a primary, use all of it. Okay. Now we'll see if we can go to drive C. And we haven't formatted yet, so back to A, but at least it shows up now. And we'll format C. And we'll put the system files on it. Okay, or we won't. Yes. Okay, we've got our format. And we're going to call this WFW-311. It's a volume name. And now we'll do a sysc. There we go. Now we'll look at C drive. And there you go. We have a 1 gigabyte drive, which is bigger than Windows ever seen in its life. And it's bootable. So that's a good thing. Now, you're going to notice that you don't want to play with your mouse at this point and change something. Well, you're going to be stuck unless you know how to get out of it. On your keyboard, the right-hand side control key unlocks your mouse. So that's a good little tip there. Okay. Now we're going to close this down. Power it off because it's DOS. And we're going to change the boot settings. We'll change the order. Since we have our hard disk with this operating system, we'll boot that. And we'll say OK. And let's start it and see what happens. Oh, our hard drive is starting, asking for the date and time. So there we go. We've installed DOS. Isn't that exciting? Okay.